father made sure that we were taken care of. He came from a village and he understood how difficult it was growing up. And so he wanted to give us a better life. And he was very interested in us getting an education. For that time, when others could not go to school,
Yeah.
and there was no such thing as man to a woman, and because that person is a boy, we didn't have that in our home. So we all had to do what my dad told us to do. The
And you
same.
all had the same opportunity.
Yes, the same opportunities. So we went to a Catholic school, and then when I was in the 8th grade, I lost my stepmother because I was living in Kakata with my stepmother. And then my father sent us to a boarding school, an Episcopalian boarding school. So I spent 4 years at that boarding school.
In West Africa?
In West Africa, in the county my father was born. So it was called Lofa.
Okay.
And from a village called Nyende Moila home. So I went back to school where he came from. And 3 of my siblings.
Were you in your teenage years by
yes.
then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then you went to Russia to go to college?
And then when I was finished with my high school, then I went to the Episcopalian College in Liberia. Mm-hmm. And I was studying biology. And I did that for 3 years before I went to Russia. Because a military coup had taken place in 1980 in April. And my father wanted me to go to the University of Liberia, but I didn't like it because it was overcrowded. Mm. And I've been in smaller classes. I just didn't know how I could survive in a large
where there's 200 people.
There were too many students.
Yeah.
So then I got the scholarship to go to Russia. So I went. And the classes were also even much smaller than I was used to. But yeah, I spent 7 years there and was able to leave. There were a lot of challenges, but I was thankful for the opportunity to be there. And I was also very thankful for the people that I met along the way. And those were the people that left footprints in my life. And that's where I found myself today. Stay thinking about those footprints that made all the difference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And so did you ended up then later on in life going back and doing missionary work in Russia?
Yes, I actually was deported from Russia in 1987 because of my refusal to do the exam in atheism and deny the existence of any God. And so I came to this country and went to Emory University in Atlanta.
Okay.
And right at that point, when I was finishing up, there was a coup in Russia. So the Board of Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church hired me to go back and be their first missionary. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got back into Russia and became the United Methodist missionary there.
And you did like outreach programs?
Yes, we have so many. Mm-hmm. I was with a hospital that the Board of Global Ministries and St. Jude had relationship with. And so I worked at that hospital, and then I also worked in villages because my views kind of changed when I was at the hospital. because we had patients coming in all the time, and you treat them, and they will still come back. And the reasons behind them coming back was not very clear to me. You could give them the best drugs, they will still come back.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that, they didn't take it when they go home. They gave it to them, they went home, and they just forgot about it until again they fell sick,
Yeah.
and then they would come. And so the question was, something needed to change and something needed to be done. And that something was to start educating people about their own health. So I became very interested in public health so that I will be able to reach a large group of people with the information. So I spent a lot of my time in villages and towns around Russia. They had a very good system in place, but people didn't use it. It was called the Felcher's Point. And the Felchers actually came from the German, where in every little village they had a little post where people could come and be treated and taken care of. So that was the system the Russians had, but also overlooked. But then I became very interested in it.
In how to make things better over the long haul.
Over the long haul for
Right.
the people.
I don't want to take you off topic too much, but I'd love it if you could say a few words about the underground church in the Soviet Union. When Christianity was not allowed by the Soviet Union, but yet the church thrived.
Well, I mentioned my deportation because I was a believer when I came from Africa. And so the Soviets thinking was they would bring all the foreign students to Russia and indoctrinate us. And then we will go back to our home countries and we'll be the best people to propagate the system. But instead of that, the table turned on them because the underground churches were very effective in evangelism. Very effective. They risked everything they had to share the gospel with people. And so I was part of that underground movement. They could not have access to Bibles, but I could have access because I had the opportunity to leave the country. And each time I left, if I went to England or Sweden, I always came back with Bibles. And so then I would do my own distribution amongst the believers. And I always think about how for granted we take everything. Because for those people in those days, they could not read the Bible. They could not own a Bible. It was forbidden to have a Bible. And so people, if you have one Bible, you write the first chapter of John, and I write the second, and that's how we pass it around, and everything will be handwritten, so you pass it around from person to person. And
so that they had their own.
So they had their own. So by the time you wrote John, somebody else wrote Matthew, and so that's how we were compiling the Bible for people to have access. So that's when I said the table changed. You will meet many Africans today in Africa, and if you ask them where did you become a believer, they will tell you in the Soviet Union. And then you were like, Soviet Union, because Soviet Union was meant to indoctrinate students to send them back. How did you become a believer? It was because of the underground churches. They were very active in their outreach. In the government, at the level where we were brought, we were not treated as human beings, basically. And then you'd find Russians who were in the same country, but were believers. And so their lives were totally different. They reached out to us.
The kindness.
The kindness.
The love.
The love, the respect. They treated us like humans. And so people turn to gravitate towards that, and that what happened.
And
Yeah.
how did they were allowed to be believers at that point, or
They were not.
was that
They,
underground
it
as
was.
well?
That's why we call it the underground church. They were not allowed to be believers, and they were not even allowed to go to universities. They were allowed to go to high school, finish high school, and that's it. Because according to the Russian system, mentally they were not capable of going to universities. So yeah, we found ourselves being privileged to be in their country and having access to their educational system because they wanted to send us back home with that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But God had a different plan. So those underground believers and us became really close friends. Even today, we're still very good friends. We still communicate now. It's open, and we can talk about our journeyings and talk about the times that we had fellowship together and some of the things we did, which we couldn't do. Had to go to their homes at night. Had to go to church in their homes, not because you knew where you were going, but because there was an address that was placed on a tree where you could read and it would tell you the number of the house that you were going to. So that's how we got there.
So were you frightened?
I guess as a young woman at that time, no. I had come to meet these very fine believers who risk everything for us. And so, no, there was no fear, actually. It was just God is able to protect us just as He's able to protect them. And so they were leading us, and we just followed. 1990. So later, things were free.
So it, basically the women of Liberia got together and said, we're done with this, and they organized and they made it so that democracy and peace could come back to the land.
Oh, that was when the Civil War. We're
Right.
talking about the Civil
Yeah.
War. Yes. The Civil War had lasted for 14 years.
14.
Yeah. So
Wow.
think about 14 years of your
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
From day to day, you had to move from place to place. I was not there,
Yeah.
but that was the story that I met when I came back. So people had to go daily to look for food. And if you were in this area that felt secure, and then you heard gunshots, so then you have to run to other. So for 14 years, that happened. And finally, the women decided that enough was enough, and they were going to do something. And so that's what they did. And in fact, there's a movie, I don't know if any of you saw it, but it's called Praying the Devil Back to Hell. That's about the Civil War and what happened.
So after that was over, it was when you heard the call to try and go back and help, because
No,
it was
actually, I had the call to go back to Africa based on my experience when I was in the second grade. I lost a good friend of mine who was also in the second grade. And we lived in different communities, but we met in the middle to walk to our Catholic school that I went to. And so in the second grade, the class teacher for us gathered all of us like we are today, and she announced that my friend died on a weekend. And for me at that age, I couldn't understand why my friend could die. And then when her family came and told us she died because she was witched. And I thought, why didn't they witch me too? Because we're friends. But immediately, I thought differently. I felt like in my household, my father made us take anti-malaria medication every Sunday. Chloroquine. You had no choice. You had to take it every single Sunday. And looking back at it now, I think, how did we actually survive it? Because we had severe side effects from the chloroquine. Our whole body would itch, and we would scratch, we'd get the comb, and I would scratch my brother's back, and he would scratch my sister, and it would just itch us. But that was side effect of the drugs. We didn't know, but we took it. But in my friend's Helen's house, they didn't take it. So I concluded that Helen passed away because of malaria, not because they witched her. And so I was going to become a doctor. Imagine I was just in the second grade. That I still look back at it. I think that was when God planted that seed in my heart, because I've never desired anything more.